Endurance is not one of the skills that helps you have a good relationship or helps you have love in your life. Endurance is the opposite of that. It's not loving yourself, which has to be like a necessary precondition for loving someone else.
Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Jennah-louise.
So Dave, where I would love to start is with one of your beautiful books, How to Be an Adult in Relationships. There is a connection between freedom and self-confidence. When you are kept from expressing your deepest needs and wishes, you lose trust in their validity and in your own judgment. You survive by finding out the rules and following them, thus hiding what you really want. You make it your purpose in life to please others rather than to affirm yourself. So where I wanted to start, Dave, is for you to share more about the process of affirming oneself and how this plays into how we show up in relationships.
So it would be a combination of asking for what you want and letting it be okay that when you do that, you show vulnerability because you are implicitly saying that you need the other person. And I think that those two together are actually quite threatening to some people. You know, we're just not used to asking for what we want from someone, and we're also afraid of becoming vulnerable because the other person might take advantage of that. So a big part of growing in self-confidence is putting it out there as to who you are, which you reveal by your needs and wishes, and then letting it be okay that you've placed that in the hands of someone else and that you thereby automatically become somewhat dependent on the other. You can't get around it, as part of intimacy is becoming dependent. Not in the sense of constantly needing reassurance or affirmation, but in the sense that some of your happiness is now in someone else's hands.
Yeah.
And that's not what happens when you're single, that it's in your own hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like this kind of plays into something that you said that really stood out for me. You said most people are not brought up to know when they are suffering, but brought up to endure, and that is what is success. Can you share more about this relationship of, I guess, what would be suffering, and I assume like not listening to your own needs and wants and just learning to sort of endure the idea of not always having those met?
You begin to believe that as long as you can endure whatever the situation is, no matter how painful or how inadequate, that's the equivalent of success. And it goes back to that concentration that some of us were brought up with on the importance of enduring suffering to show that you really are strong. Whereas in a healthy relationship, you're not trying to look strong, you're just trying to look like who you are. And sometimes we're strong and can take care of ourselves without the help of others. But most of the time, we need others. We're social beings. And we began life needing mother, nursing, for survival. And that's really true throughout our lives. But when you try to be ruggedly individualistic, you convince yourself, you could convince yourself that you don't really need others. So the loving person is the one who admits the need for someone else, is willing to become vulnerable so that some of his or her happiness is in the hands of someone else. And the other part of learning just to endure suffering rather than to speak up and say, this hurts, is that you imagine that if you don't speak up, if you just keep enduring, as I said before, you'll become stronger. But it isn't really strength, it's becoming a victim.
I'm really curious, sort of, in relation to relationships. Another thing that stood out for me, Dave, was you speak about all the love in the world will not bring us happiness or make relationships work, that requires skill. Can you share more about the skills that you sort of teach and write about?
Well, the skills are the ones described in the book, but the main ones are the skill of being able to make a commitment that fits with what you can actually come through with, like not more than what you can do, and not appreciably less, but just about right. And then to keep agreements, and then to deal with conflicts, which will certainly arise, by addressing them directly, like saying, I think this hurts, or this seems to be a problem. Let's see if we can work it out. And the working out is the processing of it. And then resolving it is usually like, let's make an agreement to do things differently so that we will both feel good about ourselves and each other in the relationship. So basically, you're learning the skill that we talked about at the beginning, which is to affirm your own needs and longings, to trust that the other person can come through for you, and to trust yourself that if the person doesn't come through, you will be able to speak up and say, ouch, instead of endure. Endurance is not one of the skills that helps you have a good relationship or helps you have love in your life. Endurance is the opposite of that. It's not loving yourself, which has to be like a necessary precondition for loving someone else.
That's what I really love about your work, Dave, is sort of this idea of coming back to oneself, of looking within and sort of meeting our own needs and wants. And I know that you sort of share this idea of the 5 A's, which sort of makes up a larger concept of unconditional presence. Can you please share more about that?
Sure. We begin our lives with, of course, 1,000 needs. But there are 5 specific needs that I have talked about, and which go with the subtitle of the book, The 5 Keys to Mindful Loving. And these needs are the ones we came into the world with. They are attention. So we have a need that when we're born, someone pays attention to our nonverbal cries and understands that we need either to be fed or held or changed. And this attentiveness comes from usually parents, mothers especially. And this is where we learn basic trust in humanity, because we get it that I'm on a planet on which you can express a need, it'll be listened to, and then it will be fulfilled. That's the origin of trust. So the first A is attention. And we also need to be cherished and valued by the people who care about us. That is appreciation. And that, of course, like attention, will carry over in adult life and become one of the needs we have in our adult relationships. Third, as we start to show our personalities, we need to be with people who accept us just as we are, rather than try to make us into what they need us to be. That too will carry over into adult relationships. We want to be with someone who accepts us as we are rather than tries to make us over. Next, we need to be held affectionately, experience human touch. In fact, now we know that the brain develops precisely in infancy on the basis of trust and holding. And that too will carry over into adult relationships in the form of sex or some type of affection shown physically. And then finally, when it's time for us to move along without having the need to be carried by someone else, for instance, when we first crawl across the room instead of need to be carried, we need to be with people who will allow that. It'll be okay with them that we're becoming autonomous, that we are learning to take care of ourselves. And that's the opposite of being controlled. Mm. So attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, and allowing us now to show some independence. Also something we need in an adult relationship. When you put those five together, it's like a working definition of how to show love in a relationship. Mm. It was the way our parents showed love to us, hopefully. And it's how we show love to each other and how we show love to ourselves. So I'm going to pay attention to my own needs, accept myself as I am, appreciate what I'm going through, and value myself. That's appreciation. And I'm going to allow myself to act in accord with my deepest needs and wishes, rather than hold myself back because they conflict with other people's definition of who I'm supposed to be. And then finally, show affection to myself by healthy diet, healthy living. So the same 5 A's go for self-love, parent-child love, and relationship love.
I'd love to know your perspective, because people sort of have differing opinions on this. When we sort of talk about being able to meet these needs ourselves, how strongly does this play into being able to receive for others? For example, if you do not have the capacity of like deep self-love, do you think, Dave, that we have the capacity to receive that depth of love from others? Or does it always sort of start with our own relationship with ourselves?
Well, it starts with loving ourselves when it comes to showing it. But it does not have to start with loving ourselves when others love us, because some people love us in such a way that it leads us to love ourselves. Oh, if that person loves me, it's in some way lovable.
How does this play into your sort of 5 mindsets of ego?
Well, the ego is the part of us, ego is the Latin word for I, the part of us that becomes narcissistic, entitled, thinks thinks of itself as a big shot.
Mm.
And that's going to be the opposite of the style of true love, which is has a humble orientation. I don't remember the 5 mindsets. Do you have them there?
I don't have them all here, but I do know that 2 that I sort of pulled aside to talk to you about. One was sort of like fear and worry that I think really shows up in relationships. I think that's like a really big one that everyone can relate to. Can you share more about sort of, I guess, the skill set, as we're talking about these are skills that we can develop to sort of be able to help us with the fear and worry that does sort of come up in relationships?
Well, the 2 main fears are the fear of making a commitment, because if I make a commitment, this is what we say to ourselves, I will lose my freedom. I will be smothered. I will be engulfed by the other person. That's one fear. Another fear is I'm afraid I'll be abandoned by the other. I'm afraid that if I don't toe the mark, if I don't endure whatever is thrown my way in the relationship, even though I don't like it, that the other person might leave. Those are the 2 main fears, the fear of engulfment and the fear of abandonment. I have a whole chapter talking about those. But the way to work with them is to feel those fears and to make that commitment anyway, and to allow the other person to come and go without thinking of it as abandonment, just simply seeing it as this is all part of the allowing that I allow the other person to make decisions that reflect his or her own needs and wishes, rather than always being right here at my beck and call. And most of us have both of those fears, but one usually is stronger than the other. Like, in other words, some people fear abandonment more and others fear commitment more.
And does this sort of play into, because the other one I put was control, and that's certainly a big one in relationships. There's a lot of uncertainty in relationships and people try and sort of assert their control. Is the sort of same practice of allowing something that you would encourage?
Oh, of course, yeah. And you're basically, that's the mindful part of the subtitle, and mindful loving, that you're also the witness. But of course, a witness is gathering information and evidence. And if the evidence that you're getting is, I'll never get my needs met here, then it's time to go rather than endure. When you become strong enough to be able to do that.
Right.
Or I guess even if you can make yourself strong by doing it, by moving on if you need to. Of course, if moving on to do is just, find somebody else and be with that person and start over again, that's not quite the same as let me first find out if I can take care of myself. And then go to a relationship from the perspective of all that you've learned and how much stronger you are in yourself. See, it's never going to work if what you need is someone who will make up for your weaknesses. It has to be with somebody who cooperates with you in the human project of acknowledging weaknesses, working in ways that turn them into strengths, and accept the loving care of someone else, but not become so dependent on that care that you no longer take care of yourself or think you need to.
So in relation to triggers, it's definitely a topic I want to talk to you about, Dave. I heard you actually share, I think, you've had over 5,000 clients, and sort of the most common word that you heard was this word trigger, and you've written a whole book on triggers. Can you share more about what a trigger is and the purpose of having or experiencing a trigger?
A trigger is anything that creates an immediate reaction in you. And all of us are triggered every single day. For instance, just a simple one, a loud noise will trigger a startle response, like what's going on? Mm-hmm. And of course, that helps us to survive because we need to look and see if there's danger around. Another trigger is anything that suddenly creates anxiety in you. For instance, this person is showing that he doesn't like you. This person is coming across in a threatening way. And so you're going to be triggered into fear, but also hopefully you will have worked with your triggers. And in the book called Triggers, I try to show how to do this, that you have made yourself strong enough so that you're no longer afraid of people. That you get it, that some people are threatening, and you back off if you know that's the only safe thing to do, or you go nose to nose with them if that is what works. But you're not triggered in the sense of becoming immobilized. So some triggers activate you to go do something, like you heard a loud noise, activated you to go look out the window. But some freeze you, paralyze you. Someone seems kind of threatening, and so you're just kind of get into a stuck place, and you can't even defend yourself. So that's the kind of trigger that you would want to work on. And of course, in relationships, we're triggering each other all the time.
Yeah. And
we're triggering each other not only by what we say or do, but two other important levels. One is that the partner is saying or doing something that reminds us of our parents and how they treated us. And so we're triggered into a bigger response than really fits the bill, because now we're responding to the mother's face that we have put upon the partner. And secondly, you could also overly react when you're triggered because of a trauma that happened in early life, and now you're being re-traumatized. And in all of these triggers, the response is going to be fight, go nose to nose, flee, back off because it isn't safe to be here, or 3, freeze, fight, flight, freeze. And we don't want that third one, because then you're just stuck. It's the equivalent of your body's enduring. Triggers are very fascinating because everybody has different triggers, and some people have the same. Obviously, all of us have the startle response that goes with being human. But then we each have very unique triggers that go just with who we are. Sometimes our brothers and sisters have the very same triggers we have because of how our parents were. You would want to see a trigger as the trailhead when you're going on the most important hike of your life, which is to look back at what happened to you in early years. Try to make sense of it. Let go of resentment towards your parents for how inadequate they were, how inadequate we all are, and no longer let what happened in the past design your style in a relationship with a partner. That's an important part of love. I want to be with you as you, not as the latest version of mother or father. And that's very hard to pull off. But there are ways of working with it. That's what the whole self-help movement is about. And I notice as you get older, it doesn't happen quite as much, but it does still happen. I think at a certain point in life, we're supposed to say, I can no longer blame my mother or father for anything.
Yeah.
It's all me now.
Yeah. And what does a practice, Dave, look like letting go? Like, say we get sort of those in-moment triggers, as you're sharing, particularly in relationships, they're our greatest teachers. What does sort of that practice of being triggered and then starting the process of letting go of that trigger look like?
You let go of the trigger by naming it. Oh, this is one of my triggers that I need to look out for. And then acting the opposite of your ordinary reaction, like instead of running away, face it directly. And third, you stay present to your experience and see how it hooks up with your past, but no longer let the past dictate what happens in the present. One of my books is called When the Past is Present. Title says it all. Yeah. Because it's always present for most of us. But as I said, as you get older, it's not quite as present, but it still rears its head here and there. It's just the nature of being human.
And how would you help, or how do you help people to expand their capacity to handle more love and positive energy? Because I think this is sort of one that's sort of less spoken about in this day and age, is sort of our fear of the capacity to receive love, and that we can sometimes, out of that fear, sabotage ourselves when relationships are actually going really well. How do you help people sort of to be less fearful when things are going well in relationships?
Well, first of all, it's understanding that it's understandable that one would fear love. One, you have to be vulnerable in a love relationship. So as we said before, that's going to be scary for anybody. Secondly, the other person loving you means that the other person is paying attention to you very closely, and some people can't handle that. They find that invasive. They find it threatening. You also might not be used to being truly cared about in a committed way because it's never happened to you before. So you can get it, that you can understand that some people would find being loved scary, but gradually, as you learn to trust being the bridge between fear and love, you allow the other person to love you, and then it works out a lot better. You reminded me of a song, lyrics of a song by Pink Floyd. All alone or in twos, the ones who really love you walk up and down outside the wall. Some hand in hand, some gather together in bands. The bleeding hearts of the artistes take their stand. And when they've given you their all, some stagger and fall. After all, it's not easy banging your heart against some mad bugger's wall. So that's what it feels like on the other side of the wall when you're trying to love someone and that person can't handle it. It feels like, there's a wall, and after a while, you get tired of banging your head against it.
Mm.
Or if you were taught to endure, then of course you're going to keep banging your head until you have no head left.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go that way.
So how do we balance that, Dave? Because sort of the final note I have here is you've shared a beautiful sentence: to have the generosity to love before I am loved. Can you speak more about how do we become the person that has the courage to love despite sort of how the other person shows up, but to also sort of know when to stop banging our head against the wall if that's sort of what ends up happening?
It would be I love because I am a loving person, rather than I love because I want you to love me back.
Right.
Saint John of the Cross, Catholic mystic saint, says, love is my profession, it's all I do. So like when you're oriented that way, it no longer even matters whether somebody loves you back, because this is just who you are. And at the same time, you get it, you're respectful of the other person's fears and freedom to say no to you. And so you're not pushing the love on someone. You're just holding the love in your heart without demanding that the other person come across in a certain way or even be in a relationship with you. This is what Buddhism is called the loving kindness practice. We love those who love us, but we also love those who don't love us or don't want us to love them. And we do this silently without being intrusive, because this is who we have become since we have found Buddha's enlightened way. So it's more about who you are in the world, rather than how you're manipulating others to come across.
Beautiful wisdom to end on, Dave. Thank you so much for this conversation. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Jennah-louise.
And I'd love to ask you, Dave, on a final note, what does it mean to you to be human?
For me, being human means an unreserved and unconditional yes to the way things are. That is the serenity to accept what we can't change. Secondly, the courage to change what needs to be changed. And third is the wisdom to know the difference. When you put all this together, you're acting in a human way. And then finally, I would add to that you get it, that our calling here on this planet is to co-create a world of justice, peace, and love. And that the unconditional yes can lead you there, because it includes the courage to do what it takes to change hate into love, to change injustice into justice, and to change war into peace. So being human isn't just personal, it's also something we do in a community of others who want to co-create with us this better world. It's getting harder and harder to imagine that's possible, but we're not giving up hope.